Today we're going to be testing out a Cayin A-100T amplifier. It's a Chinese-made amplifier, but I would not put it into the category of a typical Chinese-made amplifier. This thing is made quite well designed, quite well engineered, and quite well built. So let's look at the specs on it a little bit. This thing is rated at 70 watts per channel. It is as you can see here, 4 KT88s in this thing, and they are in a parallel push-pull configuration. There's a lot of nice amenities to this amp. One, it's got a remote control. It's got a switch for triode linear. It's got multiple input selectors, for some of your listening pleasure. But I'll tell you what's really cool about this thing. Okay, this amplifier has an individual bias setting for all 8 of these KT88s, which makes it really neat. It's really hard to find a matched octet of tubes, and this helps compensate for that a little bit. But there's 2 switches on the back of this thing, round rotary switches, and as you turn them, you can see here I've got one of the little LEDs in between these tubes right here lit up right now. And then this meter here will go over, and as you can see right here, it's set right here in the very middle on bias. It gives you an adjustment spot, and all you do is you come over here and you notice it reads, and it'll tell you that that's to B3, and you just adjust the bias pot here on B3 until this is in the very middle, and then you reach back here and you turn this little knob until you get it onto the next one, like B4, and you adjust the little bias spot until you get the center bias adjustment here. So really neat way to adjust the bias. Anyone could do it. You don't have to take your amplifier to an expert or someone like myself to have it biased for you when you swap out tubes. Uses a 12AX7 on the front end, 2 6CG7s, and 2 12AU7s on the front end. I'm going to flip it over and show you the underneath of this thing. Okay, we'll kind of start at the top here. It's an extremely well-made amplifier. If you'll notice, Nikon capacitors throughout this thing. Really nicely laid out and designed little bias network here. Kind of starting at the top side up here, you've got a little digital board here that controls the switches on the front. You've got a motorized servo unit here for the remote control to adjust the volume pot. Got a nice little choke made here. This is a relay. There's one on each side, and I can't see the one I'm pointing to down at the bottom. But this is what does the switching between linear and ultralinear when you make that choice. This is the 4 coupling caps and little bias network here. You can see it's tied in via ribbon cable over here to a little digital logic board. This is where those potentiometers are at right here. For the 4 biases. So you get your individual bias on all of these via these potentiometers over here. And then as you switch on over, you kind of got the your output transformer, your power transformer. You got the same matching down on the bottom. You've got your input selectors over here, and he's using this set of relays here to select these things. And if we flip down and kind of look at the bottom of the amp, it's just the same thing duplicated. You've got your speaker outputs, which are feeding out of your output transformers. This whole section right in here is kind of your power supply, and it's pretty heavy duty stuff. Really good caps throughout this amplifier. These are all real caps, which is not a famous brand or anything, but they're also not junk either. And you kind of got your power input, and you can see these 2 selector knobs right here. These are all these cables come over here and tie into this board, and feed over here and tie into this board. That's what just turns the lights on underneath of these the LEDs in between these tubes. So a really well laid out amplifier. I was shocked, honestly. Typically when you pull out pull the bottom off of a Chinese-made amplifier, it is just full of circuit boards. This one's actually 90%, I would say, point-to-point wiring, and they've done a really good job of nice tight wire. Look at the wire twist here. All these are the filament wires, so really did a good job on all that. Just using a little bit of digital circuitry for the bias here, for the input selector, and for the for the volume control, as well as a little bit of switching going on up in here to control these relays for the linear to ultra linear switch out. Now, the reason I have this amplifier on the bench, a friend of mine had dropped it off with me, and it was having an issue. And it turns out that this thing had a bad ground point on it. Just, you know, a simple little spot like this right here where it's supposed to be grounded. There was too much paint on the ground connection. There's quite a few in here like that, and so I didn't just fix the one that I found causing the issue. I fixed all of those, and you know, that ultimately solved the issue. But let's flip it over and check out the specs on this thing. That's what's most impressive to me. One thing to note, when you turn the amplifier on, this little light here, the LED and the volume knob will blink, and it does that for long enough, about a minute, for the tubes to warm up, the filaments in the tubes, to get the tubes warmed up before it turns on the B plus to the tubes. Some people believe in that method, others don't. They believe it helps extend the tube life. You got your little infrared indicator here, power on and off, a selector, and you've got CD auxiliary tape and preamp. And then you've also got a triode to ultralinear switch here on the front of this thing. But let's I've got it hooked up now, and we're gonna crank up the 8903 and the 3582 up here and take a look at this thing on some meters. Okay, we've got this thing on the 3582, and look at this, quite a large signal here driven into it, and look at the harmonics. They're pretty much non-existent on this thing. I'm very impressed. I'm driving with a 400 millivolt signal, so pretty much consumer line level into the coming out of the 8903 here, 1 kilohertz tone, and right now I'm running at 0.26% distortion on this thing. Let's flip over here to the right channel, and I'm at 0.21% distortion here, and very, very similar here. The slightest little, teeniest little blip down here that you can barely even see. If you move it over, it's at 3 kilohertz, and it is so small that you can't even really measure it. 37 millivolts compared to the primary here being at, it's actually even off scale at this point, at 3.34 volts. So extremely low harmonics on this thing right now, and some really good distortion numbers. But let's look it up the computer and run it on some of the Pete Millet software, and you see how this thing actually looks here. You can tell it's biased perfectly on that tube. You can kind of swap from tube to tube to tube here, and you can see, oops, that's in the middle with no reading. There's all 4 of those are biased quite well. So let's jump on the Pete Millet software and see how this thing does. Okay, as you can see here, we ran a THD plus noise versus frequency sweep with the Pete Millet software that connects to the 8903. And you can see here at around 20 hertz or so, it's got a little bit of distortion up around the 1%, but quickly by the time you get to 30 hertz, this thing's down to 0.5%, and quickly drops down here into the 0.2 range, and stays in the 0.2 range all the way through 20 kilohertz there at that point. And this Pete Millet software on my unit maxes out at 20 kilohertz, so pretty good sweep. Alright, and I ran 2 sweeps on a frequency response, and you can see here you're like minus less than 1 dB down here at 20 hertz, but by the time you get up at about 40 hertz, this thing is flat all the way up till you hit around 8 or 9K. It drops down just a hair, and this thing stays pretty solid all the way to 20K. I've varied the volume just a little bit on the unit just to keep these things from laying exactly on top of each other. But you can see the beauty of it is the frequency response on both channels here are identical. Alright, let's see how this thing actually sounds. I'm pretty impressed with it, to be honest.
You let me move on in my worst of days.
Thing is full bass, that's for sure. Rock solid. One thing I like about it, the output transformers run nice and cool, so power transformer can get a little bit of warmth to it over time, but all in all, I think for a Chinese made amp, this thing is absolutely phenomenal. Just thought I'd make this video today to let everybody out there know that not all things made in China are total pieces of junk, and I've been pretty impressed with this one. Thanks for watching, everybody.